Thornton, and clearly prostitution has been a large part of your work. But I wondered, in the sense that you recently wrote about your experience at York University, which is an experience you don't want to repeat. But for listeners, pretty hostile response to you speaking there. And part of that is to do with the trans debate. But it was also, I think, some people saying, oh, there are sex workers at York University who choose to do that. And so forth. And I wondered, is there an intergenerational, do you think, difference in how people view sex work these days? Because you have sites like OnlyFans, and I've definitely found from conversations I have with, people in their early 20s, and then I'm a group who's probably, I'll still say early 30s, that is probably my kind of peers will see it as a much more dangerous website, whereas the younger women I speak to will think it's actually much more liberating.
There are hundreds of ways to be a feminist, but most of them are wrong. And this is absolutely the case. I'm not actually even joking. I don't mean that you have to sign up to a set of prescribed beliefs or ideals, but there is a basis to feminism, which is it's against the subjugation of women and against men's rights to abuse and dominate women, and it's for the liberation of all women. And some of these women who are calling themselves feminists are anti-feminist. So those that are arguing that sex work is regular work, that it's labour, it's a job like any other, it's the oldest profession, what they're doing is that they are ignoring the plight of the most disenfranchised women on the planet. There's a cohort of highly privileged women and men that identify themselves as sex workers who are atypical of the sex trade. And I know I've travelled the world I've been in legal brothels, illegal brothels, and everywhere in between. I've talked to pretty much everyone involved and hundreds of survivors of the sex trade, including those women that are still in the sex trade. And what you find is male entitlement that is off the scale, a view of women that is deeply disturbing and often grossly misogynistic. And so some of these tourists, as I call them, the highly privileged PhD, kind of white, highly articulate, highly educated women and men that speak for the sex trade as sex workers, dip in and out of it, doing bits of BDSM, bits of escorting here and there. And of course the woman who has a PhD, is highly privileged and educated, has a second home in the Cotswolds, sends her kids to private school, has never been raped by a punter, has no alcohol and drug dependency because of the trauma, has been treated beautifully by her sweet-smelling, handsome Richard Gere clients. Of course she exists. Never met her. She will be there somewhere. So does the black British man in his 40s who's never, ever witnessed or heard of any racism. I'm sure he also exists. But they're atypical. And when I get accused of being whorephobic, I mean, talk about a tongue-twisting, ridiculous term to use against a feminist who campaigns to end abuse in the sex trade. What they're failing to see is that this is actually critical of the men and the normalisation of sex buying, of pimping. This is nothing to do with the right of a woman to do what she wishes with her body. I'm no threat to women who decide that they want to sell sex to earn a living. This is not the woman who is doing wrong in any way. It's the pimps, the brothel owners, the punters, those that normalise the most horrendous form of unbridled, cruel, sadistic capitalism that we have seen. And how men on the left, or women on the left, can defend such a gross industry that abuses women of colour, care leavers, sexually abused girls, poor girls and women all over the world, I fail to see.
You mentioned Richard Gere. I recently actually had Pretty Woman come up on my Netflix. What do you think that film is dangerous, or people can just work out what they want from it?
Well, Pretty Woman now is kind of... I look back on it with nostalgia in a way that I do the IRA now that we've got ISIS. You know, it's... Yeah, at the time it was pretty dangerous. I remember going into a school, 16-year-old girls, 16, 17-year-old girls in Russia, in quite a poor area, talking about feminism, and half of the class wanted to be, as they put it, prostitutes when they left school. They saw that they had no opportunities. They'd been told it was great. I mean, if you look at Julia Roberts and her friends on the streets in that film, how healthy does she look? I mean, this is not real life. Richard Gere is not real life. None of it is. And ask yourself this about Pretty Woman. It was a hugely successful film, wasn't it? It grossed millions and millions and millions. It went all over the world. What usually happens with films that are that successful? Sequel? Pretty Woman 2? Where's Pretty Woman 2? There can't be Pretty Woman 2. Because by the time we get to Pretty Woman 2, he's called her a whore and kicked her out. He's taken her kids off her. And she's on drugs. And he's got some other woman. So none of it's real life.
Now, you mentioned earlier on